Exodus 15, I'm going to start reading in verse 1. It says, Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. Thy right hand, O Lord, is become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, hath dashed in pieces the enemy. And then I'm going to skip down to verse 22. It says, So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. The verses in between 6 and 22 are continuing the same theme as what we read in the first 6 verses. Verse 22, So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. Let's go ahead and we'll stop there and let's have a word of prayer. Go ahead and be seated. Kind of getting back on the series that we've been on. When we started, or where we started this chapter, is immediately following the Red Sea crossing. They've just been miraculously saved from the Egyptians. It was a moment where all would have seemed lost. They were pinned up against the Red Sea with nowhere to go, and the Egyptian army closing in. This looks like certain death, and then God opens the waters so that your entire nation can cross over on dry ground. And if that wasn't enough, God then used those same waters that he let you pass through to annihilate the Egyptian army. This was big, which is where this chapter started, verses 1 through 6 that we read, and actually going all the way through 21. They are singing a song of praise to God, speaking of his might and his preservation and his ability, because things had looked bad, but God was in it and led them through, which is what we looked at 2 weeks ago when we were on this. But then that's immediately followed. They go straight from a song of praise to God. It's immediately followed by the wilderness journey has started, and 3 days into it, they're complaining. Right off the bat, they are questioning God. It's already that where is God and why did he lead us out here to die? You think a little bit about this stretch of their history as a nation, where they go from Egypt, where yes, they were in bondage, but at least in bondage you knew what each day held. It was bondage, but they knew what each day held. That one of their biggest complaints in the wilderness that we see over and over was food. Well, at least in Egypt they had food. We're in bondage, but at least we had food and water and a roof over our head. To now they are wandering in a desert. And early on, at least, they had or were going with a purpose of the promised land, but after the spies, that changes to just wandering until you die. You want to talk about wandering around feeling lost, feeling, adrift in your life, feeling like you've got no direction in your life, you're not sure what to do. Try this on. Waking up every single morning knowing I'm going to wander around in the wilderness until everyone from our generation dies. Let's be honest, it would be a little hard to get up in the morning. A little hard to get out of bed that, we're going to get up, we're going to wander around again, and maybe a few more people will die. We'll get a little bit closer to being there. It would have been very easy to feel like I am lost, I have no direction, and where's God? Because let's be honest, no one likes to be lost. No one likes to be like that, adrift. A few years back, I was deer hunting, and I did a really dumb thing. I saw a game trail, and I decided to follow it. But anyone who knows animals knows they don't walk in a straight line, and there's branches off everywhere, and I was head down following game trail for a long time, and finally stopped and looked up and realized I had no idea where I was. That is a very intimidating feeling. It's a really, a helpless feeling when you have no clue where you're at. No one likes to be lost. No one likes to be adrift in life. Earlier this year, I went up and helped my brother with some work, and we were working on Friday Harbor. And we got done, it was 9 or 10 at night, and we were catching the last ferry back across, and we get on the ferry, and it's pitch black outside, and we're going along, and we were sitting in his truck in the bottom of the ferry, and in a ferry you can hear the engines rumbling and all that, and all of a sudden we hear a big boom, and all the rumbling stopped. And a bunch of alarms start going off, and you see mechanics running around, and so finally we caught one of them and said, "What's going on? It's obvious you guys are a panic. What's going on?" And they gave some sort of technical terms, and I said, "Wait a minute, does this mean that we're just floating here?" And he looked at me and said, "Sir, we are adrift." Amen. This is a good, that's a great feeling when you're just out in the middle of the water, no engines, no anything. People, we don't like that. That's a very uncomfortable feeling when you're adrift, when you have no control. The children of Israel, they felt lost. And the question was very quickly, where is God? We see that portrayed in their attitudes throughout their time in the wilderness, that this attitude of, where is God? Why would He just leave us out here to die? And yet through it all, God was there. Through the entire thing, God was there. We have the benefit of looking at it through our Bibles, and when you read in your Bible about their wilderness experience, it's hard to read it without seeing God. It's hard to read it without seeing God, but in their situation, they're saying, where's God? But the same is often true for you and I. We all go through times that we simply feel lost. We feel adrift. Feel like there's no direction in my life, that I'm here, I'm like the children of Israel, just wandering around the wilderness until I die. And it's really easy in those times to miss what God's doing. Just like the children of Israel often couldn't see Him, it's really easy for us to miss what God is doing in our lives, but He's still there. My terrible rhyme all throughout the series. You guys are going to get so tired of it, but I love saying it. Don't despair, God's there. Tonight I want us to see God in the wilderness. The first way that we can see that God was with them in the wilderness was God was in their provision. The Bible doesn't tell us how many people exactly Moses led out of Egypt. So I did some looking into it today, and so-called experts say anywhere from 600,000 to 6 million. Pick a number somewhere in there. Any way you go, that is a massive number. So I'm going to jump somewhere in the middle. Let's go with 2 million. 2 million people. There are only 3 cities in the United States that have more than 2 million people. New York, Chicago, and LA. 2 million people is a lot of people, and I know that they left Egypt with food and animals and such, but when you're talking about providing for 2 million people, that's only going to last so long. In fact, I think they did pretty well, because the Bible tells us that the manna happened the 15th day of the second month, so they packed enough for a month and a half. That's not bad to feed 2 million people for a month and a half. But what now? I mean, you're talking scrounging food, or you aren't talking scrounging food for a handful of people. If you're desperate, coming up with food for, 3 to 5 people isn't too terribly hard. But 2 million, that's a completely different story. But Moses didn't have to figure it out on his own. The people didn't have to figure out, what are we going to do for food? God did. God provided. God provided their bread. In Exodus 16, Lord spake unto Moses, saying, I have heard the murmuring of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, At even ye shall eat flesh, and in the morning ye shall be filled with bread, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God. And it came to pass that at even the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the host. And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, It is manna, for they wist not what it was. And Moses said unto them, This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Gather of it every man according to his eating, an omer for every man according to the number of your persons. Take ye every man for them which are in his tents. This is, to me, just an insane miracle. No, the people are hungry. They want food. They start complaining to Moses because the moment that people get hungry, it doesn't matter how good everything else is, they are miserable. I've figured it out with working with teens. I can have a mediocre teen activity with games that flopped, but if the food is good, they're going to leave happy. But I can have the best planned out games and an amazing activity with no food, and they're going to leave complaining the entire time. So, that's what's happening here. They're hungry. All of a sudden they're hungry, so God makes it so that when you wake up, food is sitting on the ground waiting for them. It only lasts one day, except for the day before the Sabbath. God must have added some extra preservatives that day so they could gather it for 2 days or something. This is undeniably God. But then take it a step further, because until preparing for this, I hadn't really thought much about this, but think of the sheer number, the amount of manna we're talking. Now, the Bible describes it as a small round thing. My brain, I picture it like a biscuit. I don't know if it is, but my brain, I picture it that way. It's going to take a whole bunch of biscuits to fill me up all day long. I mean, that's just the honesty of it. I love biscuits. Now, multiply that by 2 million people. I mean, picture this, waking up with enough biscuits on the ground to feed 2 million people for a day. That's a lot of biscuits. This is undeniably God. And I know it's funny, but this is something that you cannot see this. You cannot get out of your tent in the morning and see that laying on the ground and think, this just happened. It's undeniably God. No one could have thought to explain him out of it, some other explanation of how this happens each morning. No, this is God providing. God provided them with bread. God provided them with water multiple times. Chapter 15, we read it a minute ago, God turned bitter water into sweet. By throwing a tree in it. I mean, come on, that doesn't happen. God turned bitter water into sweet. Chapter 17, God tells Moses to strike the rock and it'll give water. Then again in Numbers 20, where God tells him to speak to the rock, and Moses gets angry and strikes it instead, and yet God still gives water. Multiple times where they are thirsting and thinking once again, why has God let us out here and left us? Why has God left us to wander and die? And God provided. And again, you think of the amount. Enough water to satisfy 2 million people and their animals. We're not talking the bitter water in Mara. We're not talking a mud puddle. We're not talking that Moses whacked the rock and it cracked and a little spring came up out of it. Because that wouldn't have done the trick for 2 million people. Satisfy 2 million people in their livestock. We're talking massive amounts of water in the middle of a desert. It's another instance of God saying, hey, look, I'm here. I didn't leave. I'm still here. I'm still working. God provided them bread daily. God provided them water repeatedly. God provided them meat. The children of Israel, they're eating manna that Exodus describes as tasting like wafers made with honey, and they complain, which just boggles my mind. If I could eat biscuits that tasted like honey every single day of my life, sign me up. I mean, I'm all for this idea. But it's once again, they get tired of it and they immediately go back to, where is God? Why has he left us here to die? So God brings meat. Numbers chapter 11, 31 and 32. And there went forth a wind from the Lord and brought quails from the sea and let them fall by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and as it were a day's journey on the other side round about the camp, and as it were 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. And the people stood up all that day and all that night and all the next day, and they gathered the quail, and he that gathered the least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. God brought in so many quail that it says 2 cubits high. So I looked that up. That's 3 feet tall. It's a pile of quail 3 feet tall all around the camp. Enough that it took them, says, a day and a night and a day to, how do I put this nicely, to butcher the quail, I guess is the nice way to put it. And enough that the one who gathered the least, according to this, gathered 10 homers of quail. Now I looked that up. 10 homers equals out to 581 gallons of meat. That's to the person who gathered the least. Now, that's more birds than you'll see in your lifetime. That's like a hunter's dream right there. But simply put, what it was God providing. It was God providing in a time that they were lost and wandering and thinking, where is God? God was there, and He was providing for them the whole way. We can see God in their provision. We can see God in their leading. Imagine being Moses for a little bit. Imagine that, trying to lead 2 million angry people through a wilderness. Now, there is nothing about this that's going to be fun. Now, I like getting out in the wilderness. I'm an outdoor kind of person. Any of you who know me know that. I like to be in the middle of nowhere. But there would be nothing fun about leading 2 million people through a wilderness. Especially these people who are very prone to complain. The minute something's wrong, they're mad at Moses. Now, this isn't going to be just a fun little hike through the wilderness. This is going to be work. But Moses wasn't leading. God was. We already saw that sum a few weeks ago when we saw that God, when He took them out of Egypt, He led them around the Philistines because He knew that they couldn't handle a fight yet. That wasn't Moses doing. That was God. We can see God leading when He led them to the Promised Land the first time. I'm not going to have us turn there right now, but Numbers 13 is where they reached the Promised Land the first time. They've already been in the wilderness for well over a year. Some say that they were at Mount Sinai where they got the law from God for over a year. So I'm obviously not going to go through that entire time, but through it all, God was there. He didn't just lead them there the quickest route to where they wanted to be. He led them the route that He knew they needed to prepare them. God led them. God led them to the Promised Land, but God also led them to wander. In Numbers 14, verse 22, it says, because all those men which have seen my glory, my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me now these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it, but my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, and hath followed me fully. Him will I bring in a land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwelt in the valley. Tomorrow turn you and get you into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. This is the spies have just come back and they've given their report and said, we can't take this. They doubted God's ability despite what He's already done, despite the fact that He got them out of Egypt, and despite what they saw happen at the Red Sea, and despite the manna and the water and the quail, despite the victories against enemies that they have already seen in the wilderness to this point. They doubted God's ability to give them the land that He had promised. But God doesn't abandon them. God doesn't say, well, since you're rejecting me, I'm rejecting you. He then led them to wander and stayed with them the whole time. God was leading. He led them to the Promised Land, He led them to wander, and then He led them to the Promised Land again. He led them back. He took them to the land that He had told them so long before. Joshua chapter 1, it says, now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass, the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto a land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. They have wandered. Those who God said can't come in are now gone. Moses has now died, and Joshua steps in, and immediately God says, it's time to enter the land. It's time that I lead you into your land. This wasn't Joshua pushing that, he's now in charge and I'm going to do things my way. Moses has wandered, but I'm moving us in. This is once again God leading. It's God coming to Joshua. Through it all, God was there. Through it all, God had provided. Through it all, God had led their footsteps. God was with them in the wilderness. We can see it in, as I said, there in His provision. We can see it in His leading. And then lastly tonight, we can see God, I'm just going to word it this way, we can see God in their God. In the time that they were in the wilderness, God had showed them, had proved to them that he was their God. In a few different ways. He had proved to them he was their God by giving them the commandments, giving them a set of rules to live by. Nobody likes rules, but everybody needs rules. There is no one that enjoys having rules put over you and having restrictions put on you, but we all need them. And giving rules shows that you care. I've explained this to my kids, that I make rules for them and I punish them if they don't follow the rules, not because I'm mean and like to punish them, because I really don't. I do it because I care. I do it because I love my kids and I want what's best for them. If I didn't care, then I'd let them do whatever they wanted. For instance, I make the rule that my kids can't go run in the street because I don't want my kids to get hit by a car. I care. And I know that seems simple, but if I didn't care, sure, go run in the street. I don't care if you get hit by a car. God giving the commandments wasn't God just being mean and, lording over them. It was Him showing them that He was their God and that He cared for them. That He wanted what was best for them. God showed them that He was their God by simply their survival. I don't want to go too much on this. I know I've already kind of mentioned this, but 2 million people in the wilderness wandering around and living through it was only because God. God protected them from the elements. I already spoke about the food and the water. Those are necessary, but they're also in a desert. Those are kind of dangerous places. And God protected them from that. God got them through that. God protects them from their enemies. In the time that they traveled in the wilderness, they were attacked. They traveled through dangerous areas and survived it, not because they were mighty men, not because they were great soldiers, but because God protected them from their enemies. God showed them He was their God by helping them survive those things, by helping them survive everyone, themselves. Now you look at the time they were in the wilderness, and over in that time, they had people trying to start uprisings. And it wasn't people from the outside, it was people from the inside. Divisions and problems among the people, but God dealt with it all. He proved to them that He was their God. He showed them by the commandments and by their survival, and then He showed them that He was their God by their entrance. After all the wandering, after all the years, after all the doubts of where was God and the questions of why has He left us out here to die, after all of the miracles that they had seen, it was finally time that God was going to give them their land. It was now time that He would fulfill His promise. Through the entire wilderness experience, though very often they didn't see God, He was still there and was still working. As I said earlier, we look at it in our Bibles and it's hard to not see God. Though they didn't see it, God was still there and God was still working. As I prepared for this often in life we feel like the children of Israel, don't we? Just very often we do that. We feel lost. Maybe we aren't sure what the direction is that God's leading. Sometimes you feel like you're just wandering through life. You're adrift. God's still there, and He's still working. He's still providing. He's still leading. He's still proving that He is your God. Often, we are blinded to what He's doing, though. We're like the children of Israel. So wrapped up in what we are facing or the life in front of us that we don't see Him. But whether we see Him or not, He's still there. There were a lot of times that the children of Israel are looking around saying, "Where is God?" And He was still right there. He hadn't gone anywhere. Here's my challenge tonight. Look for God in the wilderness. Because I promise you, He hasn't abandoned you. So I was preparing for this, the song kept coming to my mind, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. If we will turn and look at Him, the world around us doesn't seem so bad. And that wilderness, if we'll look for Him in the wilderness won't seem so bad. If we will, in those times where we feel like I am just adrift, if we'll look to God, we'll see that He's still there providing, and He's still there leading, and He's still my God. Let's pray.